The violent clashes in Israel and Gaza have prompted international calls for calm and raised fears that the situation could ignite into a wider conflict. Now, the UN Security Council will hold another emergency meeting later today to discuss the escalating conflict. The closed-door meeting has been requested by Tunisia, Norway and China. The first, held on Monday, ended without a joint statement. Meanwhile, UN envoy for Middle East peace has warned that the spiraling violence is now escalating towards a full-scale war. The United Nations Rights Office said it was deeply concerned over escalation of violence, criticizing the use of force by Israeli police. United Nations Rights Office said that no force should be used against those exercising their rights peacefully. White House said on Tuesday that President Joe Biden is being briefed daily on developments in Jerusalem and Gaza and has directed his team to engage intensively with senior Israeli and Palestinian officials. Press Secretary Jen Psaki said on Tuesday that Biden's team is communicating a clear and consistent message of support of de-escalation of the crisis.
Since last week, he has directed his team to engage intensively with senior Israeli and Palestinian officials, as well as leaders throughout the Middle East. His team is communicating a clear and consistent message in support of de-escalation, and that is our primary focus.
Meanwhile, hundreds of protesters gathered outside the Israeli consulate in Midtown Manhattan on Tuesday in support of Palestine amid escalating conflict between Israel Defense Forces and Hamas. Clashes also broke out between Israeli supporters and Palestine protesters during the demonstrations, and protesters chanted slogans and blocked traffic to voice their dissent. A large group of pro-Palestinian demonstrators also took to the streets of the British capital on Tuesday to protest against the violence. Protesters waved Palestinian flags and chanted slogans in central London, while police blocked off a similar group of pro-Israeli demonstrators on the side of the road to prevent clashes. And now Arsen Ostrovsky, an international human rights lawyer and an expert on West Asia, joins us live from Tel Aviv for more on this situation. Thank you so much for joining us. How do you assess the situation on ground, and what can you tell us about the broader implications of these clashes? We seem to be having a problem there. Just for our viewers, once again, the violent clashes in Israel and Gaza have now prompted international calls for calm and now have raised fears about the situation. Many feel that the situation could turn into a wider conflict. The UN Security Council is set to hold another emergency meeting later today to discuss this conflict. This would be the third. This closed-door meeting has been requested by Tunisia, Norway and China, and the one that was held back on Monday ended without a joint statement. UN envoy for Middle East peace has also warned that the spiraling violence here is now escalating towards a full-scale war. The United Nations Rights Office too has said that it was deeply concerned over escalation of violence and it has criticized the use of force. And we're now being joined by Arsen Ostrovsky. I hope you can hear me now. My question to you is, how do you assess the situation on ground, and what can you tell us about the broader implications of the clashes?
Hi. Look, the situation on the ground now, as you can see behind me, is calm. I'm speaking to you from Tel Aviv. Last night, these skies were lit up with rockets after several hundred rockets were fired by the Hamas terrorists against Tel Aviv, Israel's most populous city. I can tell you personally, I spent the night in bomb shelters, in and out, with my children, with my baby and with my 4-year-old, my wife, my family. This was a harrowing night. In the last day and a half, we've had something like over 1,000 rockets fired from Gaza now, over 1,000 rockets. That is roughly about a minute and a half, every rocket every minute and a half over 1.5 million Israelis within the firing range of rockets. Now, that is an extraordinary figure. No country in the world, India would not suffice, would not tolerate one rocket, nor would America, nor would any country in Europe, nor should Israel. And the blame for this rests entirely with the Palestinian Authority, with the Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, who have incited this incessant and relentless wave of violence against Israel over the last weeks, starting with the Hamas and the Palestinian Authority cancelling the elections. This was inevitable. This was entirely predictable and a direct result of the Palestinian Authority internal politics.
Mr. Ostrovsky, I'm extremely saddened to hear that. I hope you and your family are safe at this point, and so are the other people there. The UN Security Council will hold another emergency meeting later today to discuss this escalating conflict. What can we expect on that front?
Look, what can we expect? I would want there to be a very clear condemnation of the Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, as well as Islamic Jihad, for the indiscriminate firing of rockets against Israelis, civilians. What they're doing is a double war crime, hiding behind Palestinian civilians while firing against Israeli civilians. This is a war crime. It is unexcusable. There is no justification for that whatsoever. Israel, like any country in the world, has a right under international law to defend itself, and it shall defend itself. We all want calm here in Israel, but it certainly does not help when Hamas continue firing rockets indiscriminately and Mahmoud Abbas's Fatah party continue to incite further violence and call for confrontation. So I would hope that the UN Security Council, in fact, any statement makes that very clear. There is no equivalence whatsoever between Hamas, which is seeking to create maximum damage and carnage, and Israel, which is undertaking its sovereign right to self-defense, as would India, as would every country in the world in these circumstances.
Right. And what can you tell us about the role of the international community and the extent of the impact of repeated international calls for calm here?
Look, the international community can call for calm as long as it wants, but it needs to direct those calls, one, to Iran, which is the regime that is funding and instructing Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and it needs to make that call to Ramallah. The Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas's party, have called for confrontation. This is not what the situation calls. Instead of stockpiling vaccines to fight COVID, the Palestinian leadership and including the Hamas have been stockpiling rockets and stones. So if the international community wishes to play a positive and constructive role, as they should, they need to make that very clear to the Palestinian Authority and the Hamas that they will not tolerate these provocations and these rockets being fired indiscriminately. Anything else, if the international community refuses to make clear denunciations like that, then I'm afraid that they are no more than aiding and abetting the situation that we're seeing here today.
All right. Mr. Ostrovsky, thank you so much for joining us at such a difficult time. We hope you stay safe, and thank you for joining us. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.